Hello and welcome to HR Vision and this debate on rebalancing the UK economy. It's been a really interesting time in the economy, with the private sector beginning to upturn, the public sector about to have a really difficult time, and changes in the financial services sector. The government's emphasising the need to recruit into STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And I'm delighted today that we've been joined by two people who are very well placed to discuss this. Adrienne McFarland, HR Director of UK and Ireland for Sage, and Martin Birchall, Managing Director of graduate recruitment research company High Fliers. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Martin, perhaps we can start with you. What talent is coming into the marketplace from universities, and how much emphasis is there on these STEM sectors?
Okay, it's interesting. Over the last 15 years, we've been monitoring the whole of the university population and looking at what graduates do when they leave university. Over that time, the number of students going to university has near enough doubled. So back in 1995, there were around 150,000 graduates a year. Last year, we got up to 330,000 for the first time. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to look at that expansion and see actually how it's come about. Of those 330,000, at first glance, 140,000 of those are doing these STEM subjects. But when you look closer to see what those numbers actually mean, it includes about 40,000 people who are going off to be doctors, nurses, dentists, vets, things which you perhaps wouldn't naturally associate with science or technology destinations. So in reality, there are less than 100,000 who are doing genuine science or engineering courses. And if you strip the numbers down further, we've only got about 20,000 people a year studying to be engineers, and less than 15,000 now wanting to study something like IT or computer science. So if you're looking at the overall percentages, there's been a massive growth in arts and humanities courses, things which don't necessarily lead into any particular vocation when people graduate, but this huge number of people needed potentially to work in science and engineering, but the numbers don't really seem to be there.
So we don't have the right people coming into the market. What actually does that mean for employers, and what type of people do they need to recruit?
Well, and I think, having the technical skills is needed for areas such as R&D and IS, but there are other areas that you can look at as well. We, for example, last year piloted some work placements of youngsters who are the 16 to 18-year-old age group, and we're going to be launching that scheme next year. The other very interesting thing is we've had a number of graduates come in a year out and spend a full year with us, and we've learnt a lot that the degree courses that they have, often the focus is really too technical and not necessarily on the right technology. And one of them said to me the other day that they learnt more in the last 5 months than the last 2 years at university. And there are other areas as well you can get talent from. And for example, we are now engaging with a charity, Autism at Work, where we're taking youngsters who have got really high levels of IQ and who make excellent testers. So there's lots of different areas that you can explore as an employer.
But of course, those graduates coming out in the market don't necessarily have the skills of science, technology, engineering and mathematics. What's happening there, and what do companies need here?
I mean, there's a real double whammy, particularly for the IT sector. 10 years ago, so the year 2000, something in the region of 12% of graduates said they wanted to work in IT when they left university. By this year, the numbers were down to just over 3%. So it's the one sector that has grown relentlessly over the last decade, and yet the number of students wanting to go into it when they graduate has been going down and down. Now, some of that is down to fewer people doing IT courses at university, but I was having a look at the figures just for the class of 2010, and it's interesting, only half of those who studied IT ever want to work in the sector again. So it's something about the courses they've studied at university putting them off the profession when they graduate. So that's clearly a big supply problem. But of course, the wider IT sector isn't just looking for programmers, they're looking for people who have a passion for IT, but don't necessarily come with a relevant degree. But of course, those numbers, 12% down to 3%, mean there are fewer and fewer of those as well. So a real kind of shortfall. And then if you look at something like engineering, which clearly very expensive courses to run at university, the 20-odd thousand who do it, only around 3/4 are even bothering to apply for engineering jobs, and only around 60% say it would be their first choice. So there's a huge number going off into other areas, be it the city or consulting, these other destinations.
So aside from the courses not being very good, what is it that's attracting graduates into the city? Is it the old adage of that's where the career opportunity is, that's where the money is?
Money is certainly a big part of it, and we monitored the starting salaries that the top 100 companies in the country offer. And if you look at the average starting salary for 2010 for somebody going into an investment bank, the average is now £42,000. So age 21 or 22, clearly a very generous package. Compare that with the major industrial and engineering companies, the average there is around £24,000. So straight away you've got almost a third difference between those two starting rates. And what a lot of graduates are now focusing on, given the sky-high debts they're leaving university with, it's not really just about the starting salary. Where will you be in 5 years or 10 years' time? And you only have to look at the city salaries, where people will comfortably be on between 75 and 100,000 within a 5-year period if they do well at one of the top banks, compared with industry, where they may be doing well to be even on 30 or 40,000 within that period. So there's a massive difference in terms of remuneration. And for an awful lot of people, particularly at the moment where debts are high, that's very definitely an issue.
What can other employers do to try and make industry sectors more attractive for these graduates?
Well, I mean, I take your point about the salaries being very inviting in the city, etc. And I've worked there myself, I know what you mean. But I think there's a whole host of other factors as well. I mean, for example, with us as an employer, graduates coming in get exposed to a wide range of technologies and products. And with an R&D function, for example, we've got a very sizable R&D departments all across our business, and there's an opportunity to get very close to the business, to product marketing, to the commercial aspects of the business, to work on different projects, to be able to take responsibility. That can be very important to graduates, to many employees coming in. And I also think there's a lot of career development opportunities in different parts of the business and different products. And, you know, we do look for people, yes, who've got the technical skills, but there's a lot of other skills and experience that we need too, and to be successful in a STEM-type career.
David Cameron would probably think Sage was a great employer, being that you're based in the northeast, and that's where we're expecting quite a lot of public sector fallout. What is it that you're looking for in employees? Are you looking for apprenticeships? Would you employ people who've come from the public sector?
Absolutely. I mean, having those technical skills or that degree course in that area, that's a foot in the door, but there's a lot more than that. You know, technology itself is changing so rapidly, and as how we worked in the business 10 years ago is very different to how we work today, how technology has moved on and so forth. So we really look for people who are very creative, enjoy that creative approach, thrive on technical challenges, and really want to build on that and bring something to our business. We want people who are really passionate about what they do, can bring our vision to life, and that they can, you know, they can take things like the brand, like the products and the technology, and they can interpret those things for themselves and give something back into our business. The other thing that's really important for us is, yes, you can have someone who's very technical and who gets pleasure from the technology, but are they looking at the technology from a customer perspective? That's really important. You know, we've all had situations where you've got a technical problem, and technology may throw even more technology at the problem to solve it, and actually create many more problems.
A language we don't understand.
Absolutely. You've got to be able to talk what people understand what people are saying. You've got to be able to speak about your technology in a way that's compelling, and be able to sell the product in that way.
And obviously a lot of your business is around customer service rather than the R&D skills that we're talking about.
Yeah, I was speaking to someone who's a CTO, and he said the most important thing is the attitude of the developer. And if their number one priority has got to be looking at technology from a user perspective, not from a pure technical one.
I think it's fascinating from a graduate's point of view. There are very few courses in the country, IT courses, which would include customer service as any part of the academic study. You just have to hope that in the 3 years people have been at university, they perhaps get involved in other things and start to pick up some of those traits, because it's certainly not a given that people with those apparently correct qualifications will actually have what businesses genuinely need. And that, I think, is part of a broader issue, which is, you know, where has all this expansion in higher education really come from? The government set an arbitrary target of let's send 50% of school leavers to university, but nobody ever really had a dialogue with employers to say, well, do we need twice as many accountants, twice as many lawyers? And of course the answer in many sectors has been no. And ironically, the sectors that did need the extra talent, like engineering, like technology, the growth has been very, very minimal. And even with those extra places, we're still struggling to persuade people to go into those careers at the end of it. So.
I think it's down to the employability skills that they have. As you said before, there's not a huge number actually going into the IT sector, and maybe we need to look at the youngsters at the 11 to 16-year-old age group and form really mentoring with those youngsters as they're forming their career choices. Perhaps even arguably the graduates are secondary. We've got to look at the grassroots level.
Interestingly, in areas like manufacturing, of course, not all the jobs are graduate ones, which brings me back to areas like apprenticeships. And I know Sage, for example, has been doing a lot on work placements. Can you give us a bit more information on that, please?
We are very keen on the apprenticeships because I think the combination of the academic work and the practical experience is hugely valuable to employers. The apprenticeships themselves can be very bureaucratic to set up. Not a reason for not doing it, but you need to be aware of that as you go into it. So it's something that we absolutely want to do. And that's why we're doing placements and with both school leavers and with graduates at the moment until we get apprenticeships up and running. But the other thing we find as well when you're interviewing graduates and in fact when they join, the ones who've got practical experience are the ones tend to be more successful. So, it's very important to, if they can, to get other experience elsewhere or other industries even.
And again, that's not built into degree courses, and that's one of the real sort of stumbling blocks for many employers, is that if graduates are going to get that work experience, it has to be some sort of external experience, which they happen to have had in their holidays or in perhaps a year out if they've had time between school and university, or perhaps a year after university. So I think if we're going to get more people engaged with employers and actually presenting themselves with a more suitable CV, we've got to move towards a culture where work experience is built into more of these courses at grassroots level.
So Martin, given the statistics you told us earlier and the fact that we know university education is about to become much more expensive, I expect we'll see many more people coming from abroad. What do you think that scenario will mean for employers?
I mean, it's literally very fresh news that students are all set for fees of anything up to £9,000 a year. Now, the messages are very confused as to what that will actually mean for those going to university in 2012 and beyond. One of the things the government have said is they will continue to support STEM subjects, so they will provide universities with a form of teaching grant. But for virtually every other course area, the only source of funding is going to be through the new student loan system. Now, I think in reality, there may be a little bit of fiddling around the edges for the first year or two, but that theoretical maximum will become the norm for almost every course and every university in the country. I can well see in 3-4 years' time, actually, every degree course, it's simply £9,000 a year, irrespective of what you're studying. And the subsidy that the government may or may not be putting into STEM subjects, actually that will be invisible and largely irrelevant when people are choosing where to study. So I don't think there's anything really in place at the moment to fuel any kind of growth from school leavers going towards STEM subjects. And of course, if you go back to, well, why don't they choose them at the moment? One of the reasons is these are some really tough courses. If you're looking at the amount of hours you put in, the difficulty level, somewhere like Imperial College, which is probably one of the most prestigious universities in the country, only 60% of their students come away with a first or a 2-1 each year, because the subjects they're doing and the standards they set are incredibly high. It's an incredibly tough environment. Go to some other universities, anything up to 80 or 90% of their graduates will come away with a first or a 2-1. So there's an awful lot of people, I think, looking at their career prospects and thinking, well, 80% of graduate jobs, it doesn't really matter what you've studied. You can go and be an accountant having studied history. The important thing is go to a reasonable university, come out with a good degree, and fill your CV up with lots of other things like the work experience we've talked about. So in that scenario, there's very little incentive to do a really tough subject like maths or engineering, because actually you could very easily come away with a 2-2 and then find yourself that, out of the top 100 employers, 80 out of 100 will not accept applications now from graduates who got a 2-2. So I think at school level, there'll be a lot of school careers advisors saying, do you know what, unless you're absolutely certain you're going to do well at this, maybe pick something more straightforward.
What other support do you think employers need at the moment and going forward during this year?
I think employers and businesses have to do more for themselves as well. The government have let out quite a lot of legislative frameworks and so on and so forth to help employers. Arguably more to be done, I'm sure. But I think there's just listening to what you were saying there, Martin, there's for me, it's the PR of technology as well, the lack of it, the lack of successful role models in technology. I don't think necessarily encourages a lot of youngsters into the field, particularly females. That's a whole different subject, but there is something there certainly about the kind of the geekiness of technology and the lack of successful female role models and some of the language and jargon used. But I think there's lots of employers that need to do to help raise the profile and PR of technology, and the youngsters themselves, because they've lived now in a whole generation of constant media technology, the web, mobile phones, YouTube, etc. And I think we've got to be asking, what significance has this part of their world played, and are they truly taking advantage of all the technical opportunities that are before them as well? So I think there's lots that we can do together, but I think it's more up to businesses, not necessarily the government, to help us out.
Yeah. And I think we can talk on diversity a bit, can't you?
Well, I was just going to say wholeheartedly agree, because I think the PR bit is absolutely essential. I mean, we go out and interview 16,000 finalists each spring to see which companies they think offer the best opportunities for graduates. That gives us a league table of the top 100 employers. And out of that, interestingly, 10 years ago, half of the top 20 made something. They were manufacturing or producing something. This year, we're down to 4 organisations out of the top 20 who are actually producers. It's now dominated by the banks, the accounting firms, retailers, public sector recruiters. So the whole appetite and the whole energy behind the manufacturing sector and the technology opportunities just isn't what it used to be. And I think that collective PR, be it across engineering employers or technology recruiters, that's absolutely key to turning around some of those stereotypes.
We talked about the fact you don't necessarily need to be a graduate, and other skills are required, like understanding business, like communication. What other skills are needed in a recruit today?
I think that when a youngster comes into the technology sector, there's going to be so much more asked of him or her over time. They need to be able to, it sounds basic, but it can be missing. They need to be able to deal with people. They need to be able to facilitate a meeting. They need to be able to explain the technology they're using, deal with conflict, manage teams, and so on and so forth. They need to be able to communicate with the customer and with all the people around them. And we often find that people want to go into one camp or the other. I'm a technologist and I just do technology, and then we just somehow get them over to people skills. But we need a combination of both, and that's quite a challenge, because the universities and the courses that they've had are not necessarily equipped that way. So there's lots we've got to do as employers, but you are looking for those skills. You're looking for something there, that passion beyond the technology when you meet them.
If there's one message, Martin, that you need to give to employers outside of the areas that we depend on at the moment, like financial sector, what would it be?
I think it is about visibility. If you look at particularly the accounting firms, the big 4 firms in this country are out on campus once a week from September through to the following July at their top 30 or 40 universities. So that's 700 or 800 opportunities a year for students to hear about careers in accountancy. All too often, the major engineering employers will simply turn up once or twice a year to do a very standard presentation saying, come and work for us. And I'm afraid in this environment, that's just not enough to overcome some of the other issues. Because we talked a lot earlier about money, and yes, there are plenty of students and graduates who are motivated by starting salaries, but there's plenty of others who aren't. They do want to engage with manufacturing. They do want to be part of something which is about building things or making things. And so for those individuals, what they need to understand is the real excitement of what those jobs will offer above and beyond the pay packet. But if those employers aren't there at the universities communicating that effectively, those messages will never get through. So at the moment, there are a whole host of employers who are running rings around some of those big engineering and industrial names.
And Adrienne, if there was one message you'd like to give out, not just to graduates, to other potential recruits, to show why people like Sage are good employers, what would that be?
I think it would be because we give the opportunity for people to get really close to the products, the technologies, the brand, and to work within a wide variety of teams. And it's quite an exciting business to be in. And there's work-life balance, the CSR activities, career development, a whole host of factors beyond the obvious monetary ones. And over to fullness of time, lots of studies have shown that people look for lots of other things beyond the obvious monetary ones.
Well, on that positive note, I'd like to thank Adrienne and Martin for taking part in this discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing from you. Goodbye.